Hello, welcome. My name's Cliff Freilich. I'm the Executive Director of Cinema St. Louis, and we're the presenters of the 29th Annual Whitaker St. Louis International Film Festival. We are absolutely delighted to have with us two of the filmmakers, the director and then producer and sound recordist of City So Real. We're really pleased to be able to offer this to the SLIF audience, and we thank Nat Geo for their allowing us to do this. The person who's I'll introduce both of the filmmakers more formally in a minute, but the person who's going to be moderating is AJ Schnack. AJ is a longtime friend of the festival and a native of the St. Louis area, hails from Edwardsville. He's also a former Cinema St. Louis award honoree. He's a great documentarian himself and has done several politically oriented docs in caucus and convention. The filmmaker, director Steve James, is another familiar person to the SLIF audience. He's attended the festival twice, and once we gave him a Lifetime Achievement Award in documentary, well-deserved. You're going to be familiar with many of his films. Hoop Dreams is probably the one that most people most bring to mind, but AJ, I'm sure, will explore some of that with Steve. And then last, but absolutely not least, we want to welcome producer and sound recordist Zak Piper, who is also going to join the conversation. I'm now going to exit and turn things over to AJ and his very capable hands. AJ.
Thanks, Cliff. Well, it's a pleasure to be here with Steve James and Zak Piper. A little bit about both of them. Steve is well known to people who like and watch documentaries, and an icon of the Midwest, working and making many films, both in and about our neighbors to the north in Chicago. He's famous, of course, for his films Hoop Dreams, Stevie, and the recently Oscar-nominated Abacus, Too Small to Jail. Zak's worked with Steve on a bunch of different projects, including his one of his masterpieces, The Interrupters, the Roger Ebert film Life Itself, and a series that came out, was it 2 years ago now, called America to Me, which was about the Oak Park High School. And I kind of want to start with that series, which, you know, hopefully some of the people who are watching have seen. It seems sort of a natural transition to have made that that series about the high school in your hometown, and then you take on this kind of tapestry of the greater city of Chicago. Steve, I know you've been thinking about making a Chicago work for a while. Was there something in making America to Me and seeing how that came out that made you sort of rethink, you know, a Chicago project?
Well, you know, it's funny because after America to Me, I swore I definitely did not want to make a docuseries again, because it was so hard. And when Zak and I set out to make this, it was going to be a standalone film. But as you know, AJ, the docuseries form is what I've been angling for my whole career. I've been making docuseries. They've just called them standalones. So you know, I think the thing I love about docuseries work, and I've certainly felt this way on America to Me, is that you can. I have to do something for Judy. But I'll do this real quick. You can, and then you can talk to Zak. But you can kind of do anything, and the canvas is wide open. And I love the idea that we're not restricted, you know, as much, and that we can kind of explore whatever you know strikes us as important. And on this series, which started out as a film and became a mini series, that's what happened. It just sort of mushroomed, and we just did not want to rein ourselves in because we felt like it was just too damn interesting to explore it all. Now I'm going to go. I have to go do something in the oven for just 2 seconds. And
all right. I really hope this is a cooking demonstration. That's a Q&A. That's right. Well, yeah, Zak, I am curious about, you know, tackling like a campaign film basically in series format, and the did you have a sense when you went into it? I mean, it ultimately ends up that there are a lot of people who decide to run for the mayor of Chicago. Was that something you were anticipating when you went into it, or did you think like, you know, we'll have 4 or 5 characters and we'll kind of try to focus on all of them?
Yeah, we didn't anticipate the number. I mean, there were 14 that made the ballot, but 21 threw their hat in the ring. That was in the summer of 2018. And when we started, Rahm Emanuel was still expected to run again as mayor. So there were only a few people running against him at that time. I think maybe 3 or 4 candidates. But once he dropped out on the eve of the Jason Van Dyke trial for the murder of Laquan McDonald, on the eve of that trial, he said he wasn't going to run, and then suddenly, you know, that's when it exploded to 21 candidates shortly thereafter. So.
And did you sense like right away you wanted to be somehow filming with all of them, or did you think like, okay, well, obviously some people are more serious than others, and we'll focus kind of on them?
Yeah, it wasn't. We definitely didn't want to film with all 21 candidates. And even 14 is too many, honestly. So in the spirit of not letting—
You would do, AJ.
I'm a glutton for punishment.
In the spirit of not making this too much of a campaign film and not losing sight of the city and the people, you know, Steve reached out to a number of candidates. We ended up obviously following mostly the long shots, by and large. They were the ones that were, you know, open to us coming and filming. It was the Bill Daleys, Tony Preckwinkle, people who were sort of the front runners that were more resistant to
Yeah, and you know, it's like we tried with them,
yeah,
but we didn't have a lot of hope that because they looked at us, you know how this is. They looked at us with the big camera showing up, and they'd be like, "Oh, hi." And then when they found out we weren't everyday media, that we were trying to do a documentary, it was like, oh, yeah, why would we do that? Whereas the more minor candidates got into the idea of what we were doing, because we talked about it being, come here, Dodger. We talked about it being a kind of tapestry and a kind of portrait of Chicago, not just this campaign. And people, you know, the minor candidates kind of like that idea, and they like being a part of it. And, you know, we also, Dodger, quiet. We also followed, God, Dodger, come here. We also followed candidates that just interested us, you know, candidates that we thought were fascinating regardless of their prospects to win. Right. Now I'm going to let the dog out while you talk to Zach.
Sure. Yeah. One of the things that I found, like in terms of making political documentaries about campaigns, and we'll talk about more of the city aspects in a second, but just from the campaign perspective, one of the things that I've always, I think I discovered was that there's so much of it that is comedic. And Steve, your work always has like such great moments of comedy mixed in with this, you know, with the verite, even in very serious subjects. But I think, you know, you mentioned Tony Preckwinkle, and that there's so much in her campaign that I don't think, probably if you're following it in the news, you're seeing just all of the ways in which that campaign seems troubled. Let's just say troubled.
Yes. Not a strong candidate.
But you get that, and you have the room to be able to show that in whether it would be a film or a series. You can play out those moments to really show that.
Is that for me or?
Either, just anyway.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great example, Tony, because Tony didn't want to let us in. We tried repeatedly and got nowhere, but it was like, well, we're just going to show up at some of her campaign events and show up at debates, and, you know, we're just going to capture her. And, you know, the thing that's really interesting is that we got to know the everyday media folks pretty well during the course of this campaign, because they're out there, you know, doing it every day. And I really feel for those folks, because they work hard and it's just a grind. And, you know, but they don't ever show those things that we show. You know, they're there and they don't really film those things, or if they do, it never finds its way into the news story. And I understand why, because that's not what they're out there for. And if they were to show some of what we showed, say, of a Toni Preckwinkle as not a particularly skilled candidate, then that could really hurt them with getting access to do interviews with her. Her people would be like, "What are you doing to us here?" You know. So we didn't have that obligation.
Conversely, you have Lori Lightfoot, the eventual winner.
Great! You just spoiled it for everybody.
Don't look on social media. She's. I think you, and maybe it's she's getting comfortable with your cameras. I mentioned this to you, I think, previously, but you really sort of see her get to be a better campaigner as you go, and that's always, I think, also something that you don't see in news coverage. Like, you don't see someone who's kind of like rusty or like it's a difficult thing for them to pull off, but then they, you know, as it gets along, they actually find, you know, this kind of the joy of campaigning, let's say. It seemed that you really captured in the waning days of the initial election, that she seems to be getting it in terms of how she's talking to constituents. Did you find that as you were filming as well? Did you see that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I necessarily saw her evolution as a candidate, or her, you know, but definitely her voice, getting her footing as a fighter. I think that's really, you know, because I think it was a month out, she was polling at 2.6, 2.8% or something like that. But it was just the scene in the Board of Elections where she holds a press conference and she's, you know, saying, "Merry Christmas, Toni Preckwinkle," you know, but getting her stocking filled with coal or whatever. But it's really, it's her in that petition challenge, her toughness in that, and in the fight she showed. I think that's what is a big part of what made her really appealing to people in Chicago. People love fighters here.
And to add to that, what made her appealing to us was just how kind of authentic she was. You know, she didn't have people driving her around. She drove herself around to campaign stops, and she was out you know, that day we got her canvassing was not an unusual thing at all. She was often out going door to door. And, you know, I think to your point, AJ, she got better and better at communicating with people and connecting with people. And by the end of that process, she's really got a pretty good gift with that. She's got an ability to connect with people. And I think that also made a difference.
I don't want to just focus on the candidates, because I think some of the stuff that's great about the series and the work are the ways in which you build out all these spaces, and I think you do it in such a terrific way across episodes, where each episode ends with these group conversations, these unpacking of you know, the issues of the day, whether it's in a you know, a barber shop or you know, a Tony penthouse apartment. And also these like long scenes that show just process. You know, that I know I've said to you that I could watch, you know, the electoral. I never would have thought this, but I could watch, you know, electoral elections office hearings and challenges. That could be a series all its own. How much of that did you know going in, that you were like, well, obviously we're going to have the canvassing and the marching and the speeches and debates, but we want to have ordinary Chicagoans from all over the city, you know, having these spaces where A, they're having conversations, and B, we're also looking at process that's separate from candidates.
Yeah, well, I mean, to the first part about everyday Chicagoans, it was part of the original conception that we would do that. But I think at first it was tricky for us to figure out how to do it, you know, because we were kind of on this candidate train, and we would go, okay, well, we should follow that, we should shoot that, we should show up at that press conference, we should get that debate. And it took us a while to kind of find our groove, I think, where we would just kind of, you know how it is, AJ, on films, it's like you're out shooting and invariably people come up or try to hail you down and say, hey, talk to me, and most of the time you're like, nice, but like, no, thank you. We're not gonna put you in the movie.
What channel are you?
Yeah,
Yeah. All that. And on this one, it was like we welcomed that. And some of the most interesting people we encountered were people that flagged us down and kind of said, what are you guys doing? And then we would just engage with them and decide, well, we should film with them. And it took us a while to find that groove. But once we did, I tell you, man, it was a blast to be so free in the field. We'd start out a day with one thing in mind. Maybe we were going to go to the Board of Elections because we knew something was going on there that we wanted to get. But we didn't know what we were going to do after that. And we would still fill the day and end up someplace. We might end up with the Lyft driver who was driving us from one location to another and gave us this amazing moment of, talking about what had happened to her that day. We had no idea where this stuff was going to come from.
And you made me think of another thing, when the shoe shine, Maine, the guy who shines shoes, we were on the up escalator leaving the Board of Elections, and he's saying, hey, I got something. And we turned around and ran down the, escalators going up, we're running down to come over and to say, what do you got? And then he did a little thing, and then we came back and filmed the scene the next week with him. Yeah.
And what does your crew look like in these situations? I mean, is it like 3 people, 20 people? Like what does it look like?
Oh yeah, it's 20. We have a script supervisor.
I know you require hair and makeup.
I mean, can't you tell? And I mean, this whole thing is scripted. Did we not mention that? Cast and scripted. No, it's very small. Frequently 2 people. Sometimes 3, like when we'd have our field producers with us in the field, like Sylvetta or Jania. But a lot of times it would be just 2 of us. If I'm shooting, I'd be with Zak, or I might be with Bailey, who is another sound person that worked on the project. Or my son would be with Zak. Or my son oftentimes went out on his own. He went solo and just shot, which was great because he got some great stuff that way.
In terms of those conversations,
we're a real bargain, AJ.
The money all goes to craft service, I know. So the conversations that you recorded, especially I'm thinking about the barbershops and that the dinner party and the election night with the former chief, or the debate night with the former chief's family and friends watching. Right, yeah. There's an honesty that people have. I mean, they're sharing some stuff that maybe, like, on second thought, you wouldn't want out there. I'm just curious how you gain that level of trust with people, that they felt open to talk, brutally honestly about how they felt, a lot of times about race. And about this, this case that was going on in Chicago as well.
Yeah.
Was that something that surprised you, that people talked in the way that they did?
Well, what's interesting about the people watching the debate and they're in the living room, Jackson shot that with another sound person, because Zak and I were at the actual debate filming it from behind the scenes, and we thought we were getting a pretty great scene. I think, we were like, this is good, this would be great. And when we were wrapping, I got a text from Jackson, and Jackson, my son, is a man of few words when it's texting. And it just said, because he was in Bridgeport, in the neighborhood of Bridgeport where that happened. He goes, it just said, Bridgeport, wow. And I think in that case, the drinking of wine aided the sharing of points of view. But when it comes to the, and it helped that it was a white crew in that setting. Whereas in the barbershop, in the black barbershop scene that you mentioned, interestingly enough, in that scene, we had Kevin Shaw, who worked very closely with me on America to Me. He was one of the directors and also did a fair amount of shooting on this series. Kevin was shooting. Bailey, who was African-American, was doing sound. Savetta Christmas, who was a field producer, was there. And I was there. And that was probably the largest crew we had, you know, on the whole production.
For sure.
But the fact that 3 of the 4 members of the team were Black, I think made a big difference, because it's not that we wouldn't have gotten honest moments if I had just been shooting, or Zach and I had been shooting. We would have. I'm sure we would have. We've done it in the past. But there was something about the makeup of that team that I think signaled to the people in the barbershop that they didn't have to speak to me. They could speak to each other more. They didn't have to have a conversation for my benefit. They could have a conversation for their own benefit. And I think that to me is one of the more extraordinary conversations that I've been privy to, because it's really not about white people. It is about systemic racism, but it's not about white people.
And Steve, I know you've been
go pull this stuff out of the oven.
I do want by the end of this there to be a tasting.
I know, seriously.
I feel like that has to
pay off somehow.
Right.
Here, I'll show you what Judy made. It's her mix for the holidays.
Oh, wow, nice.
Really good stuff. So there you go. Okay.
Excellent.
Well, I want to follow up with that with you in a second, Steve, but I'll ask Zach in the meantime. Were there things from a producing standpoint that were more challenging for you to like get access to, or to get cameras into? You know, I especially, you know, in terms of like some of the official city functioning, whether it was the Board of Elections, was that tough to access?
Surprisingly, it wasn't. It was very easy actually to get into the Board of Elections. It's all considered, it's all public. Nothing that goes on there is, you know, everything's transparent. And in fact, I think you can just as a regular citizen observe the process if you wish. So we just observed with cameras. So we were able to move around, you know. I think from access wise, I don't feel like we really had that many issues. Certainly with certain candidates, we had issues.
They tried to throw us out of the Gord Daily press conference, which was funny because we had press passes. You know, we did it all official, so we were totally official. And Daly's campaign was so controlled. They were like, we had been trying to get into the campaign for a long time, and the woman who was the liaison was like, no, if we let you in, then we have to let everybody in who wants to do a documentary. I go, who else is, you know, like, I mean, who are we talking about here, right?
Right, yeah.
So she finally, you know, it was one of those things where we're there, and she goes, hi, because we have a big camera. She didn't remember us because it's mostly been phone conversations. And then it clicked who we were. So she came over and she said, you're going to have to leave. And I said,
it's a closed press conference.
I go, why? She goes, it's a closed press conference. I go, it's a press conference and we have press passes. And she was like, yeah, but you're going to have to leave. I said, you'll have to force us to leave and I'm going to film it. And so then we didn't leave.
Right.
That would have been a great scene for us, but it didn't work out. But we liked the scene we got. But you know, I want to say something about Zach though, in terms of the producing part of this, because Zach, when we started this project, Zach had forgotten more about Chicago politics than I knew, in all truth. I mean, he really is someone that really pays attention to it, and not just at the mayoral level, but at the aldermanic level. You know, he was really steeped in it. And so I learned a lot from Zach on this project. And so Zach ended up being really the guy that followed on social media and followed the press book. And so, you know, he kept us in touch with whatever was happening. And if something, there were frequently times where we were going to go this place and he'd be like, ooh, I think we should go over here. We'd be like, oh yeah, let's go there. And I would have been lost trying to do that because I'm not on social media. And he just had the knowledge base about what sounded right and was important to do. So.
One of the things I was going to ask you about, which you just mentioned in terms of the barbershop scene, you know, there's obviously been a conversation within documentary about who tells what stories. I know this has come up with you in the past in terms of, your making films about that involve race, that a lot of your subjects have been African American. Just curious if you were thinking about that in any kind of different ways. Obviously, we hadn't gone through sort of the reckoning that we've been through this year yet. I mean, maybe you could talk about it certainly in the context of the final episode. But how do you go into the project, and what do you think about in terms of, I know I'm going to be telling a story about all parts of this city, and a lot of that are going to be communities that are very different from my own.
Yeah. How much longer is this Q&A? Because that's a
it's a 5-part Q&A. And
so yes, I have been thinking about this, and I've been thinking about it for years because of the work I've been doing, but I have not been thinking about it to the degree that I've been thinking about it the last couple of years, let's just say. And on America, to me, it was a very, very conscious decision that the stories we were going to be telling there about equity and race in this high school, that we needed a diverse directing team. That was set out to be a miniseries, and not as long as it ended up being, but it was going to be a miniseries. And so we were very intentional about the team and making sure that in key positions of authority directing, that it was a very diverse team. On this one, it started out to be just a standalone film that we were going to have a diverse team in the field with us, and we did do that, although we could have done better, without question. And I think that I plan, and Zach as well, we plan to do better than going forward, is to be even more intentional about the diversity of our teams. And I am not at a place where I feel like I can't be part of telling stories about people who are not white. I don't feel that way, but I also feel like I have to do them differently than I have done them in the past. I couldn't do Hoop Dreams or The Interrupters, say, the way we did them in the past. I'm proud of those films, but I couldn't do them the same way today, and that's the way it should be. And the films would benefit from that greatly. It's not just paying, it's not just window dressing, it's actual conscious, intentional change that is actually good for the storytelling, not just for equity.
Yeah, no, I think one thing I've been thinking about a lot last couple of years, but obviously like the last 5 or 6 months, is that the stories will be better and richer, because we're not just thinking like, oh well, I'm gonna, I think about people I've asked to collaborate with me in the past, and sometimes it's just like, oh well, these are great people to hang out with, and I'm not thinking like, who don't I know, like who have I not like connected with, who should be part of this team because of the kind of story that we're telling. And I think the fact that that's now part of what we do is all the better for the work that's going to be made.
Absolutely. And another thing, it also extends to being intentional about hiring filmmakers of color, even when the subject matter isn't their community. Because good filmmakers are good filmmakers, and good collaborators are good collaborators. And I know for a fact that a number of my colleagues of color don't want to be confined to just working on projects about their own community. Yes, they do want to tell those stories, but they don't want to feel like that's all that people will think of them as being capable of doing. There's a scene in the series that's one of my favorites that neither Zach or I were at for the shoot. Kevin shot it with Bailey and Sylvetta, which is when it's when you first really meet Willie Wilson, and he's giving that he's doing a fundraiser where he's talking about how he's not going to let white people push him out of the race. He's telling other Black candidates they need to get out of the race. It's a pretty tough speech. It's not the kind of speech that he gave in front of white audiences, let's just say. He gave that speech to Black audiences. And if our crew hadn't been the crew it was, I don't know that he would have gone there. And so there's a level of candor and honesty in that moment that I don't think we would have gotten in the series had it not been for the makeup of that crew, and a very talented crew.
Mhm.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. You did 4 episodes. You went to Sundance. At what point do you start saying, you know, I think this story's not done. Let's do another. And what changed? I mean, I'm curious. I was sort of thinking about as I watched episode 5. You know, you're following some of your characters still. Some of them went to Sundance with you. Some of them had like a festival, had been part of a festival experience in the meantime. You know, that I always find that so odd with your characters when you take them, you know, when you expose them to the secondary part of the process of like, oh, hey, come and hang out in this weird film festival world. No offense, Cliff. But what was that like when you were like, okay, we're going to get back into it, and even though part of the film is out in the world, some of our characters have seen the work so far. You had now had a mayor who you had built a narrative that led up to her winning the election, and I'm sure even though she wasn't at Sundance, she was very aware of the fact that the film, the series had been there. So was that new challenges going into a 5th episode, or?
Well, the impetus to do it, frankly, was, you know, we went to Sundance and we played a few other festivals. We had a great screening of the entire series at that point at True False. And then the pandemic hit and everything shut down, including efforts to sell the series. And for a number of months, it looked like, well, are we, you know, how are we going to sell the series? Because everything is just ground to a halt. And then when the pandemic really heated up, you know, Zach and I were talking, and we were just like, you know, I feel like we should at least do some kind of postscript on the pandemic, because otherwise people might look at this series as like ancient history, even though so much of what goes on in this series is, of course, completely relevant to the moment we're living in. We worried that buyers and people would be like, well, that's kind of ancient history, that's pre-pandemic. So we set out with permission from our partners at Participant and blessing from them to just shoot a simple postscript, and then George Floyd hit. And once George Floyd hit, we decided, well, we're making a full-on episode at this point, because it's me, number one, and and of course, I'm really proud of the fact that we made an 82-minute episode that should have been 60 minutes. But people have always said that I can't make a film under 90 minutes. Well, there you go. It just happens to be an episode.
Right.
But I think we just decided that the story demanded it. And so in terms of the people that were in the first, that we circled back to, for us, it was just a pleasure to kind of come back around to them. And we hope for the audience, it's meaningful that you've gotten to know these people pre-pandemic, and then you get to see what they're doing post-pandemic, or the impact it's had on them in their lives. And we just thought that would be a good way to make this 5th episode feel like a part of this whole series, and a source to take some stock of Lori Lightfoot's tenure as mayor.
When you've built this language over the initial 4 episodes, what are the conversations that the two of you are having going into a 5th episode? Realizing that you'd already kind of set up a way of telling the story. How much of it were you like, we want the 5th episode to feel, connected and part of the same language, and yet at the same time, obviously, you have to start off with some calls over the computer. Right. I really liked seeing your desktop, Steve. I think how did you guys talk about it just before you even kind of went into the process?
I feel like it was something that we were talking about up until the very end of the edit. I mean, making sure that this 5th episode felt like, connected. I mean, certainly it's connected in many ways, but stylistically making sure it was connected. And yeah, a challenge with so many Zoom calls early on, because I don't know how many, you must have done about 10 different folks, Steve, over Zoom. And that was, and then we went out, we were doing a little bit of shooting in the field, but we were really trying to keep that at a minimum. And as you see in episode 5, that there's a large amount of archival. You know, we're leaning in a way that we hadn't before, to tell the story of the events that were happening around the protests and you know, looting and other things. So I think it was always a challenge. I know that, you know, the idea of you know, the seeing the TV shots where you're in different places, restaurants, bars, hardware stores, you know, using that device was a huge help in kind of making it a little more cohesive.
Yeah, and I think we also, you know, we never, even though this episode has some fundamental differences, the Zoom calls, you know, that makes it different, but we tried to do them in a way that was in the spirit of the series, that they were really conversations and engaging with people versus interviews with people. And then of course we're always on the lookout to hear from the people themselves and not just the politicos, you know, to get those voices in. You know, when that candidate for Congress, we stumbled across him at the rally, and you know, he was saying that he's a real estate guy and has the answers, and that it's the 10 Commandments. You know, he was like, well, he's perfect for our series, because that's the way we like to roll on this series. Is
Right.
We encounter people and we just hear from them, whatever their points of view. We're not there to judge their points of view. We're there to present their points of view.
Yeah. Last question, because I know we need to wrap up soon, but I'm curious your thoughts going into a 5th episode about your protagonist at the end of the first 4. You know, I mean, she is, you know, feels to me through the first 4 episodes like a real underdog, you know, an African-American queer woman, you know, have not only been one woman before who's been mayor of Chicago. It feels like, you know, like, well, can she do it? She's kind of in that underdog status with Amira and Neil and a few others. But here then, you know, she is the mayor, and we find out through episode 5, you know, well, she's got some contacts with, you know, the police. You know, we start dealing with some of the complications of our current situation that, you know, people, whether, you know, you can trust or not trust someone who is leading a city or a police department. Here in LA, we have a district attorney who is, you know, hopefully going to be voted out of office. How did you approach the mayor now? This woman who had been like a great underdog character through the first 4 episodes.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a great question, because that we felt like was one of the trickiest. There were 2 things that we felt were really tricky in dealing with this episode. One was, how do we characterize and capture and show the protest that also at times became looting or you know, violent, and not do it in a way that would feed the wrong narrative that all protesters were thugs and, you know, had up to no good. So that was something we tried to figure out a way to navigate that. And then the other one was Mayor Lightfoot, was to show, because I think her national reputation for most people who, if they pay any attention to Chicago, is one that's uniformly very positive, because she has stood up to Trump. She is this, you know, woman, black gay woman who had never run for political office, who came from nowhere and became the mayor. And that's a really kind of exciting and thrilling development. And she is progressive. So, you know, there's that national reputation, and then there's Chicago politics, and it's a different animal, and it's a different situation for any mayor, but it's particularly a tough town here. And we wanted to make sure we showed that, but not turn the whole episode into a referendum on her as mayor either. You know, I hope we threaded that needle well, in order to really give you the sense of how hard the job is, the competing forces, what makes it hard, but also what drives her to want to, you know, be mayor of Chicago.
And now that she's mayor, was she down for episode 5, or she was like, no, Steve, I already did this?
Well, you know, it's funny, because I was in touch with them. We were in touch with them from the moment we decided we were doing a postscript, the pandemic, we were in touch with them about, we want to get an interview. We wanted to hang with her, of course. I wanted to be in her car again. I didn't think that was going to happen, but they were friendly, and they were, they were like, yeah. But they kept asking, where is this going to air? And it wasn't until we could say it's going to be on Nat Geo that it all finally came together. So I have a feeling that if that hadn't happened, we'd still be waiting for that interview and that time with her. But she was great when we were with her. She gave, we did 2 interviews, not just one. We got to hang with her on a visit to the field, in a neighborhood. So, she was very generous. Really, she personally was generous with us throughout this entire process. Her press people were a different matter in the first part of the process. They were more like, go away. But Lori kind of overrode them and let us in, and they were really great in episode 5. Everybody was great.
Awesome. Well, as Steve mentioned, it was acquired by Nat Geo, and I believe it's aired already, but is available on Hulu. Correct? Anyone can go to Hulu?
It's airing commercial free on October 29th.
But is that before or after this conversation?
Oh yes, that's after this conversation.
Okay.
I'm trying to time travel right now.
You're so slick. God, you should have sent me a chat or something.
Should have given us a sign.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I could have said we just had
November.
We just had this amazing broadcast premiere.
You just had this amazing. We're after the election. Everything is like great.
Yeah. Hopefully so.
Hopefully. Anyway, yes,
Right.
you can watch it. You can watch it on Hulu,
It's on Hulu.
now, and I'm really grateful, Steve and Zach, for you guys hanging out for a bit and talking. Obviously, I could do this forever. It's a great piece of art and journalism and TV. So thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Hey, thank you, AJ, for doing it. It was great talking to you, of course.